Welcome back, everyone. It's Open World Chat. John Odom, co-host with my other co-host. Well, as opposed to my other co-host, you're my only co-host, Mark Card. Mark, tell us how you're doing.
Hi, everybody. I'm doing pretty well. How about you, John?
I'm not bad. I'm not bad. It's a delightful Sunday. I'm having a little bit of gin and tonic to, as a very life-affirming thing to
A little bit of a
welcome
social
in
lubricant
something.
going on there.
Yes, absolutely. Because this is such a social show. So it's a little lubrication doesn't hurt. Actually, last week was social, huh? We had or a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest. We got to get some more of those in here.
Yeah, we do. We do. Definitely.
Yeah, because we are social guys when you get right down to it. Well, today we're going to talk, we're diving, as we usually do, into genre stuff, but we're going to talk in honor of tick season, which I think is opening up around most of the country these days, certainly is up here in Vermont. We are going to talk about our favorite, or at least our most engaging parasites in genre fiction. And I think before we get into our favorite parasites, it's actually worth taking a look at what the word means, what a parasite is. And I
Yep.
looked at it's the Google definition, which uses Oxford's languages, and it defines a parasite as an organism that lives in or on an organism of another species, its host, and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. And we're going to talk about that last phrase, I'm sure. Um, but yeah, I think we're also going to be talking about symbiosis, which is a little different, which is the interaction between two different organisms living in close physical association, typically to the advantage of both. And I think we're going to find out in genre fiction, those two things exist on a bit of a spectrum that they don't
Yes, that's
realize.
definitely true.
Yeah.
We're definitely looking at a spectrum here.
But parasites are gross, right? They're gross. Why do they pop up
Sure
so
they are.
much?
They're how dare they only derive life from leeching onto someone else or invading someone else. Come on now.
Well, why do you think? Because, I was going through the list and actually, there's not a ton of them, but you never go very long in, movies, TV, sci-fi books, storytelling without running into parasites. Why are parasites so interesting to us?
Oh, I think a lot of it's just a horror. It's not like these things exist in your imagination. This isn't like transporters where you're imagining this stuff. This is actually a real live thing. And so people and it in reality, it's a pretty horrible thing. Um, look at tapeworms.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
Uh, Especially the way you get rid of them.
Yeah, I'd rather not
And
think about
so,
that either.
this is a very unpleasant real life phenomenon. So people are going to be fascinated with it because, it might happen to you.
Hmm.
You might go camping and drink the wrong water and get giardia,
Yeah.
uh, or any number of other parasites that basically just invade you and wreak havoc. And sometimes you survive and sometimes you die. And sometimes it's worse, you survive but would like to die.
Hmm.
So, this is not a pleasant thing. So people are going to be fascinated with stuff that, and largely it's not like you have any choice over how this happens. You get invaded some way.
And of
And so,
course, there's spiders, there's snakes, things that scare us in a fundamental way fascinate us too.
oh
And it
yeah.
tends to manifest in horror. I think I know there's a lot of academic work on why that is. But I've never, and I think there's a lot of ways you could answer, but I feel like when you get right down to it, I've never had a really clean answer, at least that works in my own head, that describes our fascination with things that freak us out.
Well, I think it's evolutionary. I think if you're not careful of these things, which can hurt you, then you're going to be in trouble.
Well, then why don't we run away? Why do we look closer?
Well, why do we look closer?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that
why do we like
fixation.
to? Why do people, have a hard time looking away from car wrecks or people who are hurt? Like I can remember as a kid, the first person I saw die was a guy who was hyperventilating at the pool and then walking around the bottom.
Hmm.
And well, what happens when you hyperventilate so you can stay underwater longer is often you die.
Great.
And so they pulled this guy up from the bottom of the 17-foot diving well, and basically everyone in the pool watched him die.
Hmm.
And so you kind of get fascinated with things. I think part of this is that, it's out of your control. So, we as a species, we start looking for how do we deal with things that are out of our control?
I think you're onto something with the control. I think you're onto something with the, and I was going to mention, the idea of looking at a car wreck. I think that's a perfect example. But I think you're onto something maybe I hadn't thought about with the control issue that that these things that could kill us or hurt us are not in our control and they could be lurking.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I mean, that's just the survival instinct of evolutionary biology.
mhm.
If we're not concerned with these things, we might die.
Yep. Yep. Which is ultimately so much of the appeal of horror. We don't talk about horror enough, as you've often said. And, talking about, even though when we talk about parasites, we're going to talk as much about the fascination with them that we were talking about as as much as the pure revulsion, because those things exist on a spectrum, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. And I think that's why you see parasites and things pop up in horror, but you also see them pop up just in pure sci-fi, which you
Yeah.
couldn't really define as horror. So that revulsion and fascination, the pushing out and the pulling in, is so unique, I think. I don't know. I could talk about it forever. I could write papers on it. I could get into it as, oh my God, as a study, as the calling in my life if I weren't too old. I love the psychology of horror. I just love it.
Well, as I said, often our fascination with these kinds of things reveals more about us than it does about the topic.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's talk about some sci-fi or horror parasites. There's pure ones, and again, there's ones that exist on the spectrum. When you think about pure ones, pure revulsion parasites. What comes to mind?
The first one, sorry, the first one that comes to mind for me, and there's a lot of this in Star Trek, a lot, is the one of the first episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation
Mhm.
in the first season. The
The
episode, the episode Emergence.
I can't even think of what those things are called because I tend to forget the first season. But I
Yeah,
know what you mean. When the Federation has been compromised.
yes. Um, so I'm looking it up.
Hmm. The episode name?
Yeah, no, I know the name. It's Emergence.
Oh, you just said, right, my bad. You're looking up the name of the.
I'm looking up the name of the. I don't think. Oh, yeah.
While
No,
you're
it's
looking, I will
not.
say this is one of the biggest dangling plot threads in
Oh
the
yeah,
Star Trek universe. And I wonder why that is, because it was so much of that first season, almost all of that first season was completely uninteresting or cringeworthy. But here you have something that universally I think people responded to, and I think they responded to in that kind of visceral way. Um, Especially the sort of gruesome effects of the things being destroyed. But we never got back to it. Definitely
yeah.
on.
No, we never did, and it was a vast conspiracy at the top.
Mhm.
And the name of the episode is not Emergence, it is Conspiracy
Oh, that makes sense.
from 1988.
Hmm.
And you never discover their origin. You never discover what the extent of the conspiracy is. You don't really discover how they got there. They're called bluegills, by the way.
Mm.
Uh, or there's another name for them. What is it?
Crappie.
I can't remember the other one. But it is a drop thread. Now, I read something in the research of this that this is this was, of course, one of the main goals of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which was to introduce, new bad guys, new rivals, new competitors.
Hmm.
And I read that this is actually uh, the genesis of the Borg. They're not connected. It's not like this was supposed to be how the Borg got started.
Hmm.
It was that they wanted to introduce this as the new big bad species, but then somebody came up with the idea of the Borg, and that was a better idea,
Oh,
which is why they dropped it.
no, that's interesting. Um,
So,
Borg
a lot of
origin.
this stuff ends up being kind of lore because nobody can find the origin of, this hypothesis. Oh yeah, they were going to do the Borg, but then they changed. I mean, they were going to do these bluegills, but then they changed their mind. So
Oh,
it's as good enough an explanation as I can, as I think that's
hmm.
an adequate explanation for why they dropped it.
Never thought about that. That's a great theory. Of course, we
So,
can't talk about, well, I don't know if you're done with these guys. I was going to say we can't talk about Star Trek Parasites without hitting another one, but you go
well,
ahead.
there's a couple more actually, and one of them I
Oh,
think
yeah.
is going to be one of. I have one which is kind of fits into both categories of parasite and symbiote.
That'll be interesting. The one just went to when you're saying Star Trek and Parasite is the Seta eel, the gunny.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, poor
For those who
Chekhov.
don't know who are listening, that's the little thing that Khan puts into Chekhov's ear to control him, and everybody was horrified and grossed out by the pictures and the music, which was very effective, of this thing crawling into his ear and him screaming.
Yep.
And that was a classic. That was a classic sci-fi
Well,
parasite.
we really could just talk about parasites in Star Trek. Um,
Yes, yes. And I do want to spend some time doing that because they were creative.
yeah, and there are a lot of them.
Hmm. Hmm.
There are a lot of them.
And they're different.
Yes, yeah, there's all kinds of crazy things. So,
Hmm. Different
yeah,
enough that some of them take away that horror element, which
yeah,
I
that's
find
right. That's
interesting.
right.
You separate things far enough. I bet I know the ones you're thinking of, or at least one of them, and I'll let you go with it. But there's one in particular from the old series, or two in particular from the old series, because they work the same way. That I think one is a little more pure than the other. That separate themselves so much from what we think of as biology that they lose, I think, some of that horror element or all of that horror element, which I think
Right, right,
is
right.
really telling and it becomes pure sci-fi. But go ahead. I mean, let's stick with Star Trek. That's
Yeah,
worth
let's stick with
worth
Star Trek.
biting into.
So,
Yeah.
I'm looking another thing up. I'm trying to think of which one it is. Operation Annihilation
I wasn't even
or
thinking of
Operation
that.
Annihilate.
Yeah.
And Kirk's brother succumbs to a parasite.
Hmm. Those are gross. And
Yeah, they
those are
sure
gross.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who aren't really, I have to keep reminding myself that Star Trek, the original series, is 60 years old. And there may be some people out here who don't know it very well because they haven't watched it.
Shame on
Uh,
them.
and if you're one of these people, turn off a podcast right now, subscribe to the proper streaming
Yep.
platform, and watch every episode binged at once.
Or at least the right third.
Yes, that's true, but still,
It's got
Do
the
a little
same
Googling and
ratio
ask
of,
them, and ask Google
yeah,
what are the essential TOS episodes and
yeah.
watch those.
It's about
Because
the same ratio of the Next Generation, even though there's so many more episodes of Next Generation. About a third of them absolutely rock. About
yeah,
a third of them are meh, and about a third of them will make you cringe. It's
yes,
about the same.
you wouldn't suggest them to your in-laws.
Right.
But anyway, so, in this particular episode, a whole planet gets invaded by them, and it's up to our stalwart uh, Enterprise crew to figure out how do we get rid of them.
Hmm.
And, that it's an interesting thing. Spock gets put into kind of jeopardy along the way, and they find the solution to the problem. So much of the original series is procedural. It's great. I love it.
Hmm. Yeah.
They're either trying to use medical procedures to end parasites, or they're using medical procedures to, cure a disease or what have you. It's just a really interesting kind of aspect to Star Trek where that wasn't done very much except in cop shows and mystery shows.
Hmm.
And so I don't think enough people talk about the procedural and Star Trek, and how much Star Trek in that kind of early to mid 60s, no, actually like mid to late 60s context, and how interesting it was in terms of influencing TV and TV writing in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So
No,
that's
well, not
that.
really. I mean, and there are a lot and I think the really creative ones I was talking about that really separate us from horror and lose that horror element are the emotional parasites that you see pop up in old Star Trek. Those are extremely creative, I think, but we're talking energy beings, so they can't gross you out. So you can get the idea, walk far enough away from the biology. And I'm thinking primarily of the energy being in Wolf in the Fold,
Yes,
which feeds on fear. It's a little more pure, I think, than the one that feeds on hate that we see later on.
right.
Uh, Partly because it seems to literally have to inhabit a human. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's a little more pure than the other. But still, that's a really creative idea, is something that feeds on emotion to the detriment of the host.
Yeah,
And
well, what's interesting to me is what just popped into my head was the TV show, um, What We Do in the Shadows.
uh
You know what I'm talking about?
I know because I didn't really watch it. I saw the movie, saw the
Well,
first few.
there are
Oh, you mean
the energy
the
vampire.
energy vampire, of course.
Your neighbor who wants to talk to you about buying tickets for this charity gala that his company is putting on. And I'm referring to a movie called Extract, a Mike Judge movie called Extract. It's the person at work that just wants to tell you all about, their weekend, and they don't think about what you have to do and where you have to go and how you have to do it.
Hmm.
And so that's really a kind of parasite. And I'm
Hmm.
glad we brought these up because there are some strictly mental parasites. And we'll talk about this later. I'm thinking of a really good example of that. There is a really good example of how they have a kind of uh, it doesn't really inhabit your uh, body except your brain. So these parasites hijack your brain, and it's like the wasp that injects its eggs into another beetle, and they control every action that larvae, that egg controls the action of the insect that it infects. Uh, it controls
Cordyceps.
its entire its entire existence afterwards.
Yeah.
It literally, these insects become robots.
Yep. Yep. Cordyceps, which
Mhm.
the very concept is so horrifying. I cannot believe it took our culture so long to really put that into play in a human context in a horror situation. And of course, I'm talking about The Last of Us with the cordyceps fungus.
Right, right.
Um, why did it take so long? Honestly, before we took exactly the kind of parasitical relationship you're talking about, and it makes it even more terrifying for whatever reason. Again, whatever reason these things scare us, that in The Last of Us, it's a fungus, which is what you see in nature a lot.
Well, again, I think that has to do with biology. There are
Mhm.
fungi everywhere. You know, we eat
Yep.
them for God's sake.
Yeah.
And sometimes, well, so my cousin brought me a shirt from the Kentucky Mushroom Festival, and it has a funny slogan on the back. It says, "All mushrooms are edible. Some of them only once." So, I mean, these things can kill you. You can think you're eating a lovely dinner of mushrooms that you gathered from the wild, and the next day, you're toast. And they're everywhere.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about mushrooms later uh, when we talk about parasites, or tangentially when we talk about parasites.
hmm
Um,
Yeah, fungus. Fungus is scary. The word is scary, and I don't know why. But you see what these, natural cordyceps do in turning ants into zombies. It was a logical fit for zombies. But I don't know why, since if you ask the average person what's the difference between a fungus and a plant, they were, especially thinking of mushrooms, they wouldn't be able to tell you, but they're
well, and they have no
still
idea.
going to be more horrified of them. Just, I don't know. It's just the word. I don't know.
Well, it's even crazier when you look into the biology of it. Um, Fungus are one of the fundamental building blocks of human life. Without fungi, there would be no human life.
Oh, yeah. The whole, what is projected that's talked about, the whole, mycelial network, with a nod to Discovery on that. But I'm talking about what the real Stamets projects as the nature of mushrooms and fungus throughout the ecosystem, which
Well,
is a whole long thing to talk about. I know what I just said is very mysterious and meaningless if you don't know what I'm talking about, but
well, yeah, well, I want to talk about them later a little bit.
mm,
So, because, um, yeah, well, we might get into whether or not this fits into the category at all, but I
yeah.
want to talk about Paul Stamets in a minute
Mhm.
because it's really interesting. Um, I mean, the scientific basis for that whole idea in discovery is real.
Yes.
I mean, it's absolutely real. Fungi are part of the building block of all life on Earth. And there is evidence that these kinds of fungi exist everywhere in the universe. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, so we get into this problem of how much of this is fiction and how much of it's true.
And how much of it is necessarily evil. So, but although before we get into that and really start talking about um, fungus and parasites versus symbiotes, or at least if not a symbiote, what do you call it? A mutualist relationship. Let's talk about some classic ones because
Hey,
we've got some classic ones going
hang
on.
on a minute. Hang on a minute. There's one other one I want to get to
Oh, sure.
that's Star Trek related, and we'll come back to
Oh, that's Star Trek related. Oh, I bet I know where you're going.
where.
To Trill.
No,
Oh, that's a symbiote, but we'll
well,
talk
that's
about
right. The Triller symbiote,
it.
the Borg,
The Borg as parasite.
parasites.
That's an interesting approach. The
Well,
idea of the nanoprobes and such as parasitical, I think that I wouldn't have thought of them that way because I think much more of them as cyborgs. But I think you're right. Once they introduce the nanoprobes, they become parasitical, don't they?
they're parasitical, and they are. I mean, ask Locutus. It's terrible to be a Borg.
hmm
It's just one of the worst experiences humans can have is to be assimilated by the Borg. And those nanobots are parasites.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing is, are they really?
Hmm.
Are they more symbiotes?
Well,
And
they
now we're getting
do.
into the spectrum. And we're going to come back to that because uh, and then we talked about stamets, and we're kind of bouncing all over the place here with Star Trek, and we'll get back onto track.
Yeah.
But is it possible? Well, I guess it might be more a symbiote. Yeah, it's a symbiote. Stamets, how does he figure out the way to control the spore drive?
Oh, we're back to that, Stamets. Well, he's got the genetic capability to
Yes,
do it.
he imports tardigrade DNA
Hmm.
into his system. That's a symbiosis. That's a symbiotic relationship.
That's true.
It's not a fully formed organism.
Well, except the DNA isn't, well, no, I guess it is alive and reproducing. That's how it works.
That's right. It's
Mhm.
alive and reproducing in his system. So,
We don't think of that as a classic form of individual life, though. We think of that as a quality or an element of life rather
yeah,
than
that's
life in
necessary for
itself.
life. Yes.
Right. So that's a little different.
But I do think that what we're getting into here now is, and because it invades his mind as well.
Hmm.
He's aware of what's going on with all other organisms in time, but he's also separated from time.
Hmm.
So is it a symbiosis? Is he getting a benefit from this? I would argue maybe he is.
Sounds
But
like it. I mean,
but
the way
again,
you're approaching it, I think it definitely sounds like it.
yeah. So there's another example, and we're going to come back to the board, but I want to do that when we're talking more strictly about symbiotes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Let's talk about more pure examples.
Well, the pure examples would be things like the stage one of the xenomorph, of course, where it jumps onto your face, stick the tube down your throat, and you're sitting there to to the detriment of the host. The biological organism is sitting clung on there and drawing sustenance from the
Right.
host. So that's a classic. It even looks sort of like a big tick with more and with knuckles.
Yeah, and talk about horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's actually a trope that kind of, I mean, especially like the eggs and how they open up to explode onto somebody. That's in lots of different movies now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the great thing about that is the first time I saw Alien in 1979 when it came out, everybody in the theater is thinking the same thing when he gets close to the egg.
Hmm.
And then it opens up, and people are like, "Why do you have your face so close to the egg, you idiot? What are you doing?"
I know you look into the thing, it's like looking nasty, like all these sort of nasty ramen noodles kicking
And then
around
it
in there.
moves. It's like, "What are you doing, you idiot? Move away from that egg. It's going to attack you." And no, no, no. Does he listen to anybody talking to the screen? Of course not. Of course not. Stupid astronauts and their stupid scientific curiosity.
Yep. There you go. Science gets you in trouble. We've had an episode about that.
Yeah, it sure does.
So
All
some other
right.
classics I would say would be something like the Slither. You ever see Slither?
No, but boy, I want to. James Gunn's first feature film.
James Gunn. Yeah. I mean it's sort of over the top. It's Nathan Fillion.
Yep.
Um it's got some really disgusting stuff in it. It's
Oh yeah.
not trying to be heavy horror. It's trying to sort of throw back to a lot of more schlocky horror. But it's still disgusting. I mean, he goes for disgusting. And that's a classic revulsion parasite, you
Yeah, oh
know.
yeah.
So, anyways, I couldn't get away without mentioning that one. It's just
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm trying to think of another kind of, there's Species.
Species. Remind me how Species goes. I don't remember it very well. No,
I
well,
don't remember it
Species.
very well either, but it's, just, It's basically an organism that will attack people to spread its, you know, genetic material throughout the universe.
Oh,
And
like Life Force or something,
mhm.
which is the vampire archetype or the zombie, but I think it really goes further back to the vampire archetype, really, which is another element of horror. And you're right, they relate. That's a very interesting observation. I wouldn't have thought of that. Interesting how the horror, so much of what scares us in horror is related to other things that scare us. Maybe the entirety of horror is a spectrum.
Well, you brought up vampires. I've got a great example from Buffy, from the Buffyverse. Angel. And talk about things that scare us. How does the parasite? Okay, so there's this episode called no, that's not the right one. Um Sorry, this just popped into my head, so I have to look it up. So
Oh,
there's an Angel episode where this parasite, this organism passes from person to person during intimate encounters.
oh,
So you have
shoot.
sex with the person, and then you're spooning, and then all of a sudden you're in horrible pain, and the parasite takes over the body of the person who is the victim, the person that they're having sex with, that it chooses to have sex with. Um, uh,
Yeah. Which is really pure version of that story. I think of that storyline, I think of It Follows, but you've got the parasitical version.
right.
Well, no, It Follows works as well, actually. If you're gonna look at it that way, It Follows works.
Lonely Hearts.
Only
There's
heart.
a demon that preys on lonely people in a singles bar. And after the demon has sex with the victim, they pass from uh, the host to the person they had sex with. And it
Mm,
bounces from person to person to person. And so Angel has to spend a lot of time in singles bars. And that's where they introduce the character Kate. That's a parasite. And that's a parasite that infects people when they're doing something which is very scary, which is having sex or intimate relations with a stranger.
that's true. And you do make me wonder if David Robert Mitchell um, didn't see that episode before getting into It Follows and making that, which um,
It's entirely possible. I mean,
mhm,
uh, uh, and that makes sense. I mean, that's just an interesting thing. The difference is this is more what I would call a ghost parasite.
mhm,
It's not a physical thing that invades you. It's a, a ghostly, a spiritual, a some kind of ethereal element which invades your brain.
mhm,
So I
mhm.
think brain parasites, which don't necessarily need a physical manifestation, are a good example of this. It's just kind of way out there on the far crazy side of the spectrum, but
Mhm.
I think there's some other good examples of that, and I think a lot of those are not parasites per se, but more on the symbiote end of the discussion.
Well, let's talk about that spectrum a little bit. I've got an example, and before I get to it, let me just say I'm having a blast talking about this. I
Yeah,
didn't
this is
know if we
really
were going to have as much enough material to cover it, but we could talk about this all week. This is very cool.
yeah. Well, and the thing to me about this is, I was like, I thought this was so much a trope and there wouldn't be so much variation to it. I was having trouble with it doing the research on it.
Mhm.
I was trying to figure out, hey, what is the deal here?
I
This
was
doesn't seem
too.
like it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah, no, exactly the same. Even though I suggested we do it. Once I got into it after the suggestion, I'm like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, how are we going to do this? How is this going to work? Now I have to indulge in a little self promotion here.
Hmm.
Um,
By all means.
I think we do a pretty good job of this. I think we do a pretty good job of going, well, let's try to attack this topic. I don't know if we, holy crap, we found all kinds of great stuff to do this with.
It's true. It's
So,
true, damn it.
Well, I can attribute to that my part in this from, many years being a professor and, where you have to learn how to improvise. I mean, bullshit. Uh,
Mhm.
it- I mean, sometimes you just have to fill time, and so you better be good at doing it.
Yeah, I'm just a dork. I have no such background in, I have
Nah,
no training in this.
well, I don't know. You are in politics, so I do think you might have a bit of an edge here when it
Okay,
comes
good
to
point.
bullshit.
Good point. Good point. Okay. But anyways, the example I was going to mention, which might be a good bridge example, because we do want to talk about symbiotes. And I know you're not a Stargate SG-1 guy. Um,
I just haven't seen enough of it to be one or not. I mean, any TV show which has the foresight to a higher Jewel state, I'm going to be interested in because she's a terrific actress.
well, she doesn't come around for a while
Oh,
in,
I know, I
in the
know.
second series. But anyways, um, so in the original series, in the first series, for the most part, the villains are a parasite, a clear parasite, the
Right,
Goa'uld. They get into your body, connect themselves to your brain, and control you. And that's how they reproduce. Essentially, they're pure parasites. And if you're caught by one, you're just trapped in there, looking out at the rest of the world like, well, like the sunken place or something like that. And they are, the idea is that they come with a bunch of technology and they seek out human life forms, not just to reproduce, but to awe them with their power and be treated as gods. But then at some point, the writers decide, it's like they occurs to them, what if you had this parasite that didn't necessarily act on that parasitical impulse, which is to, live off the host at the expense of the host. And you get a different group of the same species called the Tok'ra, who decide to share the experience with their human hosts. And because they do provide long life,
right,
they help heal. Um, the parasitical nature was that complete uh, takeover of the consciousness and the control of the body. But the Tok'ra are different. The Tok'ra decide that's immoral. And we need the humans to reproduce, but we're going to do it in a relationship where they can accept it, where they'll agree on it, and they'll share that control. And it's not like the Trill, who we should now talk about. This is probably the segue into talking about the Trill
right.
and getting into
Yeah,
more Star Trek. They do have to essentially trade. You have one talk and then the other one talks, but they don't merge into a collective being. But they take that the writers take that parasitical element and they say we're not going to make this a parasite anymore. Now it's
right.
not a parasite, and that's a cool transition they did, and that does I think lead us back to Star Trek.
Well, I like that because it introduces a trope which seems monolithic, and then they use a neat little trick to kind of subdivide it and complicate the whole storyline.
Mhm.
And so that's clever writing. That's a good example of good writing. Of course, I think they might have written themselves into a corner, so they had to do that. But even so, it's a clever solution.
A bit, but it also enables them to actually develop the Goa'uld as characters,
Right,
as
right, yeah.
three-dimensional beings, which they wouldn't have had if they were just pure, horrible. And they're nasty looking, you know, terrible special effects notwithstanding. They're these snaky things, and they're gross. So they start off, it's really pure. It's not like the movie. They go a completely different route than the movie.
Yeah.
Um, so, despite the grossness, you have some that aren't such bad guys.
Yes, I do. And I'm going to do something controversial. Remember how I talked about the Borg as parasites?
Hmm.
One Borg shows that she's not a parasite, and it happens in Picard.
The queen?
It's the Borg queen. She
Yeah, the
becomes a
queen
symbiote,
complicates the Borg for sure.
but she becomes a symbiote because she takes over uh, Agnes Jurati and eventually comes to benefit humans. And they fundamentally transformed the Borg by making her a symbiote for Agnes Jurati. So the
Um,
Borg, because of the Queen, are fit into both categories.
mhm. Yeah,
And
I think
so that's kind of a really
transformation. Yeah.
interesting twist on the Borg. You
Hmm.
know, one of the big criticisms of Voyager was you have this great uh, enemy, the Borg, and they're easily dispatched um, compared to the power and scope they had.
Hmm.
You know, it's like, why would you have this great enemy and then get rid of it?
Yeah, which I
And
think
that's
is an unfair criticism for a variety of reasons, but we won't get into that.
right. I understand that, but I think Picard is an attempt to fix that, an attempt to make it better.
Yeah,
And,
and they
and
weren't prepared to follow up on it because when we see the Borg then in the third season, they're just
yeah,
classic Borg. It's the original Queen, and that's a shame because they opened up some real possibilities that maybe we'll get back to.
I mean, if you're going to transform the species, then you got to stick with that transformation. Um,
You should. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's a good thing. But I think the Borg Queen show another kind of transition. It's just a little bit more thorough.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to go back to the whole mental parasite thing and talk
Mhm.
about Moon Knight.
Moon Knight. The idea of a parasitical spirit.
That's correct.
Mm.
So, and this is not the only example of this, but this is the first one that came to mind.
Hmm. It's a good
Moon
one.
Knight, for those who are uninitiated, is a Marvel TV series, and it really is a great attempt at a depiction of mental illness. A character with uh, dissociative identity disorder turns out to be a guy who's been invaded by the avatars, the physical manifestation of an ancient Egyptian god, Khonshu, god of the moon, in a human person. And so there's this battle between the two different avatars within one guy's body. And it really is kind of a beneficial organism, mostly. Uh, it kind of imbues him with godlike powers, and then those things are used to deal with injustice, to deal with uh, uh, um, meting out justice, and making this person who's kind of mentally ill useful in society. And
Hmm.
so, even though he has to battle with this other avatar internally all the time, this is not a physical parasite. This is, as you know, a supernatural parasite. But it's interesting to me because it all occurs in your brain.
It's true, but you're making me think of something funny.
Okay, go ahead.
Sub Rosa, the the Crusher and her ghost lover there.
Man, you are just setting up the transitions here because my next example of that is the movie Ghost, the
You
the romantic movie from 1990 or 91
you think there's a
with Patrick Swayze and
parasitical?
Demi Moore and the other. This is a great Star Trek transition because Whoopi Goldberg plays the ghost that inhabits Demi Moore's body.
Hmm. Well,
And
but only briefly.
well, nevertheless, I think it counts as a supernatural symbiote.
I
It
don't
helps
remember
her.
the movie as well as I should, so I'm going with what you're telling me here. I have seen it, of course. Everybody's seen it.
I'm sorry, I flipped that around. It's not Whoopi Goldberg who's the ghost. It's Patrick Swayze who inhabits Whoopi Goldberg's
Oh yeah,
body.
yeah. No, I know what you meant. Sorry, I should have called that out. But yeah, 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 right. When he's jumps into the tries to communicate with her, jumps into the
Right.
seance, all that stuff.
Yeah, I really think that's an example of a parasite. Not a
Mhm.
parasite, a symbiote. Now, we haven't really talked about one of the more, uh, again, does this fall more on on the parasite side or on the symbiote side, and that's venom.
Yeah, Venom. Venom was on my list to talk about, and Venom, they call it the Venom symbiote. It's not a symbiote. It's a parasite. It changes. It exists on the host to the detriment of the host, at least if you let it stay long enough. That's a
Yeah, that's true,
parasite.
but I mean, he does derive some benefits from it.
The host derives benefits from it. I think that's true, but I think that's true of a lot of the ones we've been talking about, or at
Yeah.
least some of the ones.
Oh
Uh,
no, I agree. I agree.
but I think that's always been a misnomer. I think the Venom symbiote has always been a venom parasite, except, well, not in the movies, I guess.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely not in the movies.
Yeah, yeah. And I should remember that. They've kept it more, if not malevolent, potentially malevolent in the comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's more, I mean, yeah, yeah. I think it's more of a parasite. I mean, even when they go long periods of time in the comics where it's attached to someone and then become a superhero, you still have to watch it. You still have to be careful because he
Yeah.
could fall to it and stuff like that.
Right.
You know, Flash was Flash Thompson was connected to the parasite and he couldn't stay hooked up to it too long, that kind of thing.
True. True. Okay, so I was wrong.
No, no. I mean, he was important to bring up, and you were right in the context of the movies. In the context of the movies, I think you're right. It's a
Yeah.
pure symbiote.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I mean, I think they changed it to make it more palatable because and to make it more complex. Uh, in the comics, you have a long time to establish backstory. You have a long time to kind of uh, have your characters evolve. Years, decades, generations now with the comics. You
Hmm.
don't have that in the movies. And so,
No,
if you're going to make this character more interesting, more engaging, more sympathetic, then you've got a much shorter timeline to do that with. Um, and I want to come up with a real example of a pure symbiote, which we probably should have talked about this at the beginning of the discussion, which is the Babel fish from A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
that is a pure symbiote, isn't it?
Yeah, because it benefits the Babel fish because
Mhm.
they get a place to live, and it really benefits the host because they now can understand any language in the universe.
Pure symbiosis there. That's
Yep,
absolutely perfect example of a symbiote.
yep. So you want to think about an organism which is entirely beneficial for host and for uh, organism is definitely the Babel fish,
Yeah,
and I wish we had one.
seriously.
I think things would get a lot more interesting and maybe, and I say this completely seriously, maybe more peaceful if we could all understand each other.
Yeah, that's true. Boy, I wish I had one in the next few weeks. I was just talking to you about this. I'm traveling to Poland and Ukraine, and I do not speak Polish or Ukrainian, so a babel fish would come in very handy.
I think
Depending
you'll be
on
able to figure
Google
it out pretty
Translate
well.
is not going to be the same.
Well, yeah, I think you'll figure it out. I think that's the kind of thing that when people are mutually trying to help each other out, language becomes much less of a barrier because you understand what the intent is.
That's beautiful, man. You're right. You're right. What a positive thing.
So.
Jeez. All right. Anyways, speaking of Star Trek positivity there, we'll move on. But you're absolutely right, God damn it. Um, another Marvel parasite that you don't think of as a parasite, but truly is, if you think about it for half a second, is the MCU version of Ego, the living planet.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
He's a parasite on a planetary scale.
Yeah, right. Sending all that nasty stuff to absorb other planets and, you know,
Well, and then isn't that really true though of the it's not, yeah, no, no, it's let's say what's the name of his kind of organism? Is he an Eternal?
Oh, they called him a oh, what's the matter? It's what Grandmaster is. It's what no, what the hell, man? Why can't I think of it? The Collector is one. The what are they? My God, I gotta Google it. What
Yeah.
is the Grandmaster in Marvel? An elder of the universe, right?
Yeah.
Don't they call him an elder of the universe?
Well,
No,
the
that's what he
problem,
is in the comics. In the comics, he's an elder of the universe.
yeah, it's hard to know because there are so many dimensions to,
They call him a celestial?
yes.
Yeah, see, that's so wrong, especially since they end up having an Eternals movie.
Well, like I told you, they simplify a lot of the stuff from the comics in the movies.
Yeah, or shift it in weird and strange ways that aren't internally consistent.
Yeah. Well, the whole point of the movies is to make money, so they simplify everything.
Oh well, obviously I haven't been reading the comics much in a while. That's I should have come up with Elder of the Universe right away. And I haven't been watching enough, I haven't been paying enough attention to the movies, or I would have come up with Celestial.
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
celestial, ego of the living planet.
Oh, yes.
But, I mean, and he's really bad, especially, if you're a human.
Yeah,
He's really bad.
yeah, yeah. Bad guy. Bad Kurt Russell. Bad.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to tell you what I think is the most creative parasite I've seen. Um, and that's Doctor Who's Time Beetle from the David Tennant Doctor era. Um, it's something, and it is gross looking. It's a big giant beetle, and it attaches to the back of Donna Noble. I'm going through this knowing you're not a big Doctor Who person, so I'm going to assume you don't really know this. Uh,
No, I don't really know that.
yeah, so it attaches, and you only get glimpses of it every now and then. It's like, oh my God, there's a beetle on my back, and you look, and it's not there. But it finds people who are significant in terms of points in time that could be pivotal. And
Yeah,
it
anchor
goes
beings.
back in their memories and it changes moments in their history that then change the timeline and it feeds on the change in the timeline. And it
God, that's really complicated.
isn't that weird? It's weird too. So it finds this, it with in Doctor Who, it finds the companion who would not have encountered the Doctor if she had only turned if she had turned left instead of turning right at this one particular moment in the series.
Sure.
So the time beetle creates the scenario where she turns the wrong way, and the change in the timeline is enormous,
So,
especially for Earth. And so it just feeds on this alteration in the timeline. It's kind of brilliant.
yeah, and what it reminds me of is, um, oh well,
Huh,
maybe it'll come back to me.
it'll come
It's
back to you.
it's very complicated. It's interesting. It reminds me. Oh, I know what it was. It reminds me of the movie Sliding Doors.
The movie Sliding Doors. I love Sliding Doors. It's an
Yeah,
underappreciated
this
movie.
is a
It's one
great
of those
example of how
movies.
romance and science fiction can
Yeah.
combine really, really, really well.
Did we cover that in our
We
list
talked
of
about the
sci-fi
in
movies that don't
our
know their sci-fi?
in our no, it was yes, yeah, yeah. And we talk a little bit about it in terms of time travel.
Hmm.
So yeah, that this is a movie that ticks a lot of boxes,
Yeah.
punches a lot of tickets.
And it's about alternate realities. It's a
Yeah.
sci-fi movie.
Yep, it
At the
definitely
end
is
of
a
the day.
sci-fi movie,
Hmm.
and the time beetle just explains to you how that happens.
Hmm.
It gives you a physical mechanism for taking alternate realities based on what it does.
Hmm. Hmm. Sure.
So I like when they find mechanisms which explain time travel. That's always a good thing in science fiction.
And the implications of time travel.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's fun to go bouncing around in time and experience things. The Doctor Who time travel experience
Hmm.
for the most part. Although there's certainly examples of that where it's not so much true. And I'm thinking of the episode with the mummies with Tom Baker. Anyways, I don't want to get off track. Um, but it's more interesting, I think, when you consider the real implications of time travel, like the sort of meh so-so movie, The Butterfly Effect, which I think we've
Right.
talked about.
Actually, I really like that movie. I'm quite fond of that movie,
Really?
especially once you find out what the original ending of the movie was.
Mm,
It was a much darker movie.
really? That's
Yeah.
sort of interesting.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
The original ending? No.
Yeah. In the original ending, uh, well, in the ending you see theatrically, he just decides he's not going to do this anymore, and he goes back to the timeline where he dies,
Hmm.
so he can put an end to the cycle. He does the same thing in the original ending of the movie, which the producer, the studio said, absolutely no way. It goes back to where he's in the womb and he strangles himself with his own umbilical cord
Oh, God.
because he can't see any way in which he uses this power which benefits anyone. And so I kind of like that movie, knowing what their original intent was. It's the same thing with Fatal Attraction. Do you know the original ending to that movie?
No, I don't know that there was an original ending
It's
to that.
actually the European ending to the movie. So it's a much more interesting movie if you saw it in Europe. So the scene where she rushes at him with a knife, right?
Hmm.
And then he leaves her, and then she's able to come back and try to threaten everybody at the end, and then
Yeah.
his wife shoots her at the end. That's not how it ends in
Hmm.
the European version. And the original ending, which the studio killed, after the scene where he chases her down, or where she chases him with the knife, he leaves and she cuts her own throat.
Ah.
And then he's accused of her murder, and there's a trial, and he's found guilty. And the last scene of the film is him being slammed into his cell.
Huh. That's interesting because it has pretty different implications. That's a movie that has been analyzed, of course, quite a bit from a feminist perspective. And
Well,
those,
the ending is still feminist in that he has to deal with the consequences of his actions.
well, the movie is seen as anti-feminist in a lot of circles, but that ending kind of turns that on its head.
Sure
That's very
does.
interesting. Hmm.
But yeah, the studio said, nope, we're not doing that one. That is not going to work.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I did not know that. I'm
Yeah,
gonna,
I love reading about original endings to movies.
yeah.
They take completely different turns in these kinds of things.
Hmm. Fascinating. Oh, I'm glad you told me that. I'm going to seek that out. Um, I mean, not to watch it because if it doesn't, well, it sounds like I
It's
could.
probably not available anymore.
Hmm. Oh, fascinating.
You probably have to get that at like a used bookstore somewhere.
Hmm.
It's like the Star Wars novels I saw as a kid. Those are
Hmm.
probably locked away in a vault in Lucasfilm.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
You know, those Star Trek books too. I mean, that made me think of the Star Trek books, which are not canon. Some of those are making a comeback,
Hmm.
and some of those people are saying, "Yeah, we should try to make some of these novels canon." And I think they're probably right with the Star Trek stuff.
Well, canon's such a mush. Star Trek now. It's almost not even worth mentioning. But anyways. So yeah, we've been talking a lot about these parasites here. One more typical one I want to mention just out of principle because I loved the movie
Yeah,
is the Faculty. I love that movie. I
I haven't
love the
seen
movie
it.
The Faculty. Oh, it's classic parasites. Parasites, they take over. They take people over, it's that loss of identity, and becoming an evil monster. It's very much ties into, yeah, the loss of identity.
Well,
the body snatcher idea, which is something else I think we're going to end up talking about, as is our fear of losing ourselves.
yeah.
At some point, we'll talk about that. But it's just, I just have to mention it because I love it. It's so much fun.
Well, here's the thing. You really hit the nail on the head. All of these Parasite movies are about identity.
A lot of them, I don't know about all of them, but most of them.
I think all of them touch on that question.
Mm.
What makes us who we are and how we are?
Well, you know what? I think you're right. Even the time beetle is about what makes us who we are based on the choices we make.
Yeah.
So I think you're onto something
I
there.
think these are fundamentally identity movies because, what and it relates to what's in our control and what's not in our control,
Hmm.
what we handle and what we don't, how we can handle things and how we don't handle things. And the fact is, a lot of these things are, look, there's this old maxim that goes, it's not the problem is how you deal with the problem.
Hmm.
Have you heard that?
I have not.
Yeah. It's kind of an old thing that says, look, the challenge you face is not what's important, is not what you have to deal with.
Hmm.
What defines how you solve a problem is how you solve that problem.
Right.
And so the problem exists and is kind of a constant. The only thing you can manipulate is how you deal with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that this kind of parasitic, symbiotic uh, discussion, themes of movies help people deal with.
Hmm.
You know, in many ways, we all have baggage, we all have difficulties, we all have challenges. And the question is, once these challenges glom onto you, uh, how do you deal with them?
Hmm.
And it gets even more deep psychologically. You want to talk about psychology? Here you go. A lot of people out there will tell you that most people create their own problems,
Well, that's true.
and
What's
that
the song I was thinking of?
most people will. The reason why they're having problems is something they've done.
Crashing by Design by Pete Townsend. Go listen to that song.
You don't have to get me to listen to that song. I've listened to every Pete Townsend song like 50 times.
Well,
He's
then
one of
you
my
know I'm right, right? It's
well,
perfect.
of course, yes.
I think that's incredibly perceptive of you. Bravo. I think you're absolutely right that so much of this comes down to identity. And we've had an episode where we talked about identity and we've flirted. We've come close to the parasitical notion of identity with like body snatchers. It's not there. Body snatchers is not a parasite, but we've flirted with it. But it's true, these parasitical things, they are essentially identity stories with horror elements, even if they're not actually horror stories themselves. And that brings with it a whole package of the package of revulsion, the package of drawing to it, which again is a horror trope. Well, not even a trope. That's the horror mentality. It's underpinning the horror genre. But it's at the end of the day, it's the same kind of story. And
Right.
I think you're really onto that. I think you nailed it. I think that was very well done.
Well, and the other thing is just basically, do we choose to fight what our identity is, or do we choose to accept it?
Hmm.
And I think that's where you get the line between parasitic movies and symbiotic movies.
Hmm. Right,
Is fighting this thing worth it? Well, if it's a pure parasite, you've got to fight it or you may die.
right.
But
Or
if it
just be
brings,
lost, or
yeah,
you'll be
or
lost. You'll
yeah,
be
your
subsumed,
identity
you
can be
know,
lost to the universe forever.
a living death,
Yeah.
something worse than just death.
Yep. So, I mean, I just think that's what parasite movies are mostly trying to do. How do you deal with your identity? What part is you and what part is external? What part is in your control? What part is not?
Hmm. Well, there
So
you go.
I think that,
There you go. You nailed it. You brought us full circle. I'm very impressed you came up with that, by the way. So that's going to affect my academic papers when I go back to school and talk about horror. Very well, very nicely done.
Well, it's
Um,
just, that's just the kind of thing that comes out of these discussions.
mhm.
We throw out all of these ideas and sometimes patterns just emerge.
Yep, it's true.
And that's
True.
one of the things I like about doing this so much is I didn't think we could come up with anything that was that compelling
Yeah,
with this topic. I just did not see it. And the reason I didn't see it is because,
we were
well,
talking about
we
it.
got to talk about stuff.
Yeah. Right on.
So I don't want to take any credit for it, except that, it's the result of a collaborative effort. And
Right,
so much, this is what kills me.
right. And there you go.
Intellectually, I spent a lot of time in the intellectual world, and I want to disabuse people of the notion of it's only unique geniuses which come up with interesting, revolutionary, uh, paradigm changing ideas. It always comes about from collaboration. Always, even people like Einstein and uh, Heisenberg, and when you talk about these people that are they're trying to understand the fundamental nature of the universe, it is always a collaborative process.
Right.
Yes, Einstein sat in his little postal clerk office in Zurich, Switzerland, and wrote a bunch of papers, but he didn't do all the work. This is a collaborative process, and collaborative processes are always superior to single efforts. And the fact is, you can't have a single effort because these people who change paradigms, like Einstein, like Newton, they engage in a body of scholarship. So it's the whole thing about standing on the shoulders of other people.
Well, obviously, that's us. But anyways, it's well done, and it's almost obvious now that you say it, because we talk about these stories about the tick, the revulsion, which leads into horror, which is so much about revulsion. But at the end of the day, like all other genres, like all other stories, they are stories about the self.
Yeah, the
And
self and its relation to other selves.
yeah, yeah. And that's key. That's key to the not just this genre, but every genre. It's just a
Well, and
matter of
that's what I like about
finding
lit.
how you get there.
That's what I love about literature. It's a microcosm of the human experience,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so sometimes it's a macrocosm of the human experience. So I
Well, I
mean,
think this is an
this
awfully
is
good
why.
note to end on. You know what I mean?
Well, and this is why I'm not scared of AI. AI can't do this.
The
AI can copy, AI can synthesize, AI can integrate. It ain't coming up with the original ideas. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet, not yet. Never know. But it's not examining the nature of the self yet. And when
Nope.
we get there, that's when we're screwed.
Nah. I'm really not that concerned about it. They can't get natural language yet. And if you're not
Yeah.
getting natural language, you're not understanding the human experience.
Well, that's
Now, now what I want to go back to is my old uh, criticism of AI movies. AI movies assume that AI intelligence is going to be similar to human intelligence. I don't think that's true.
Well, I don't think it's constructed that way, honestly. I mean, they used to try to work on it that way, and I think part of the reason why AI has become so successful is that it's being constructed in ways now that aren't necessarily trying to map out artificial synapses. I think that was always the wrong way to go, you know?
Well, no, I agree, but my point is, if it becomes sentient, we don't know how it's going to evolve,
Right. It's a
and
good
to
point.
assume that it would make what I'm talking about here is science fiction depictions of it. I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily talking about actual AI.
Right.
I think in science fiction depictions of AI, it will always adopt human reasoning. I don't think there's any evidence that it would. AI ideas about justice and identity and altruism may not be the same as human ideas about them.
Mhm.
So I think that's where the danger lies, but I also think that's where the optimism lies when
Yeah,
we talk about AI.
sure. Sure. We should remember there is optimism in the concept. It's easy to forget that.
Well, I just, who was it that said this? It might have been Patton Oswalt. I'm not sure who said that, but somebody said that the genius of Star Trek is no matter how bad the situation, there is always optimism.
Yep, yep. Which is
There is
right.
always hope in Star Trek.
Yep, yep. Which is where Man of Steel and all that stuff failed. I know
The
that's a bit of an
Snyderverse,
aside.
yes.
The Snyderverse failed
Well,
because
yeah.
it did
You won't find
not.
me arguing about that. It completely fails.
Yeah, I
In a
mean,
world where you have super beings and humans in the Snyderverse, there is no reason for humans to have hope because somebody is an Ubermensch.
right,
They're
right.
always going to conquer you.
Yep.
And
Superhero fiction is at the end of the day, when at least the old superheroes like Superman, it's utopian fiction. And he took
it
that away from us.
and this is why I liked James Gunn's version of Superman better than Zack Snyder's.
Sure.
Because uh Superman understands he's not really an alien at his essence. He's a human.
Right.
He's got more powers than humans, but his expression of existence is fundamentally human.
Yeah.
He is flawed. He's going to love, he's going to make mistakes, he's going to care about things. And that's why Mr. Technocrat Billionaire is the perfect foil. You know, Lex Luthor is the perfect foil.
hmm
He's the tech bro and finance bro combined. And I'm telling you, tech bros and finance bros are kind of the bane of American capitalism. They're the product of it, but they're also the bane of it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right. We've gone off track a little bit. We should probably bail. This has been a good one. I love
yes,
it.
it turned out to be much more interesting and much more complicated than I took it to be, and that is entirely my fault.
Yeah, well, it tied into all kinds of real archetypal and fundamental stuff. And you think about it after the fact, how couldn't it have? You know?
Well, this is
Well,
what I
of
love about
course it
science.
did.
This is what I love about science fiction. It's successful and not successful in the way that other genres are.
Yeah.
All literature is about the human experience, but I think sci-fi hides it better.
And in the process, in some ways, it goes deeper.
Yeah, oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
In the process, it also gets in its own way by trying to go deeper. I mean, by trying
Yeah.
to hide it.
Yeah. All
So,
right. Well, it's been a good
thanks,
one.
every,
It's been a good one. We'll see you all in a couple weeks with another good one.
thanks everybody for listening.
Our theme music is by Christopher Piatek.